Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome back to the show. My guest today is Gary McGregor from Sydney in Australia, a transport strategist who was pivotal for developing the railway strategy for Sydney. In the third part of our conversation, also the last part, expect to learn the difference between visionary and delusional transport planning, why execution eats strategy for breakfast, the importance of open debate for a robust strategy, how Sydney got to a collaborative culture where suburban and metro rail complement each other, and much more. Please enjoy and subscribe so that you get notified about all other insightful episodes of this podcast, and you can support the continuation of the show even more by noticing and acting on the following. Hi, this is Doc Frank, and before we get into the podcast, I want to quickly tell you about ONO, O-N-O. In case you don't know what it means, here in Australia it means or nearest offer, and that means that a price for a certain thing is negotiable. So how does it work and how may that be of interest to you? If you're interested in training or education on advanced modern signaling or the capacity increase of railways, then please do step 1 up here and check out my training portal docfranktraining.podia.com. You will find a globally unique collection of training offers that you can't find anywhere else. If you do, let me know. I'm always happy to learn. There are courses about the blueprint for high capacity signaling, the mindset for high capacity railways, and of course the flagship CBTC training that has been the longest running CBTC training in the world, even though it's been regularly updated. If you have found anything that's of interest to you, then we come to step number 2. You look at the regular price. If you think that's fair, that's good, then just procure the training and enjoy. I'm happy with that. If you want to save a few bucks, then send me an email to training@docfrank.com.au. And in that email, let me know which training or conference recording you are interested in and what is the price that you want to pay for it. And if I consider your offer reasonable, if it makes sense for me, I will accept it. Otherwise, I will let you know, and maybe we have a little negotiation along the way as well. And then you have the opportunity to enjoy world-class training on signaling at prices that are below the nominal package. So I think it's a good offer. It won't last forever. The current intent is to keep it running to the end of this calendar year, 2024. So don't wait to the last minute. Check out my training portal. And if you find something, then send me an email and let's negotiate. But now, please enjoy the upcoming podcast episode.
We knew that ATO over ETCS was ambitious, but we wanted to put that challenge out there. And the advice of people, including yourself, I think at the time, and other in the industry was, at this moment it's bleeding edge, but there will be a time when it's only leading edge, and let's start positioning our network for that.
You could see it at the horizon, and the thing is, with Sydney's Rail Future and the year later rail system strategy, it was not a document where you would say, and this will be implemented in the next 2 years. That was never the idea, never. So it was always, I wouldn't say a long-term strategy, because long-term strategy in Sydney goes all the way into the 2050s, like the 2056 Sydney Future Transport Plan, something like that. But it was definitely something where you were looking forward like 10 or 15 years, and looking at the time frame now, that's about right. Yeah, I mean, digital systems has automatic train operation in the scope, and the development of ready to roll out solutions for ATO over ETCS. So in hindsight, we were right. So our prognosis in 2013, I believe, was spot on. And and I think that's a characteristic of a good strategy, that you don't just apply or you just seek a solution in what you have today. You
Yeah.
extrapolate what you will have realistically in the future. I mean,
Yeah.
we didn't come up with futuristic nonsense like ETCS level 3 and moving block everywhere, which is also a problem for a suburban network. But the technical forecast that we did make in the race system strategy turned out to be very realistic and very achievable.
No, look, I agree. It was part of the issue was that there were investment decisions that had to be made in the short term, like the ATP, automatic train protection. And what we wanted to make sure is it's on the right path to get us that step change. We know where there's a sort of saying this is where we want to go, and it was actually quite easy to say in a document we obviously want ATO on a suburban network for the performance, but we wanted to say, are we taking steps that is it
Yeah.
reasonable to take these steps, and can you see a pathway? And we saw a pathway, and I think we're on that pathway. I think the pathway's probably been a little bit longer and slower than and more difficult than we'd hoped.
Yeah.
But I'm very confident when that we're on that pathway, and that the investment decisions that are made today are taking you there, because we have such a big network that you'll never get with so many moving parts. It is going to take 20 years to roll out uh, some of these fundamental changes. So having a strategy, and my feeling is you have peaks and troughs in terms of investment and decision making, but my feeling is we've never really wavered from that direction. Sometimes faster than
Yes,
slower than other times.
I was just going to say exactly that, which I think was done much better in Sydney than in some other big Australian cities,
Mm.
not to mention names here. Um, if you look at the Sydney Rail Future document, which was published in June
Yeah.
2012, and you look through the 5 stages and you read stage number 3, and you say, this is exactly Sydney Metro Northwest.
Yeah.
By the letter, by the word by word. And then you
Yeah.
look at stage number 4, and that's probably where the references came in recently. Stage 4 is exactly the CBD section
Yeah.
of Sydney Metro with the second harbour crossing and so on. And then stage number 5, apart from the section to Hurstville, which we talked about, that's Sydney Metro Southwest. And
Yeah.
with regards to the rail system strategy, again, we are on track. Yeah, it may take a little bit longer, but all the things that we have foreseen have basically come to
Yeah.
fruition, and there's a clear migration path how you get from what you had
Yeah.
in 2015 to what you had in 2020, what you will have in 2025, and what you will have in 2030. And by then, I'm pretty sure we will have ATO on the suburban network in Sydney somewhere. All right.
And one of the things you'd say, so I feel proud to be associated with something that seems to be implemented, and people are sticking to the pathway. And I want to reflect on a couple of things that I think helped in that,
Hmm.
apart from very good advisors
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah.
across the board. But one of the things I think was very important is that there was actually a lot of tension and fighting for quite a few years about investment decisions in Sydney that played out in the public arena, and that was heavy rail being announced and cancelled, metros being announced and cancelled, and there was actually quite a big debate. And someone actually said to me and I was very frustrated because there was a lot of tension, and at times people unhappy with announcements would actually leak against you in the press, and you'd read your name in the Sydney Morning Herald, even on the front page. And I was getting frustrated about it. And this particular person said to me, "You're having the debate that other cities aren't having,
Yes.
or other modes aren't having." And I think that is part of it. Is we actually had a debate about the way our rail system operates, a very intense debate. and then people were motivated to be part of that debate. And ultimately, when people crowd and come together, we get a better outcome, and lots of people contributed to that debate. And we had lots, and there was also a government that, having seen how the debate plays out, and leadership, whether that be Les Willinger or Rod Staples. I must also thank Carolyn McNally, who was also a key player, not a rail person, but could actually understood how a strategy needs to speak to non-rail people. There was a debate, and there was a recognition from the leadership of the need for a strategy, and a strategy that engaged with a lot of stakeholders. So I think that was an important thing. I think you may see in other cities sometimes those things may have just played out as a technical strategy, but in Sydney, things that may on the surface look technical actually become mainstream debates.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, firstly, you did just drop a few names, and I want to make a point, and you mentioned her name before, to have a big shout out to Gladys Berejiklian. I think in her role as transport minister, that was during the time when Sydney's rail future was written, when the long-term master plan was written, and when the rail system strategy was written. I think she was great as a transport minister. I was almost disappointed when she later was promoted to become premier in New South Wales, because she would be off the transport minister role. But despite of what happened later on, I think her championing of transport in Sydney was really critical for getting that everything together. And regarding your point with the debate, I was just thinking what happened in Melbourne, because they issued a strategy at the same time in 2012, and it looked very good. It looked very feasible. I did support it wholeheartedly, because it did make sense under certain circumstances. But later it turned out that those circumstances were not feasible. And probably because of the missing debate. When you just mentioned that point about the debate and how important it was for Sydney, and how it was maybe missing in other cities, I thought that could have been a reason why it turned out later, only years later, that the basics, the foundation for the strategy in Melbourne turned out to be, no, we don't want to do that, because we now realize it would cost too much money, segregation of corridors, that means we need additional train depots and additional control centers and additional this and that and the other. That's all too hard. We skipped the entire strategy. And that was certainly a point which went well in Sydney. And I also think what's important, you've got to have a robust strategy. And the debate is part of informing a robust strategy. But given how many changing stakeholders you inevitably have in a surrounding like Sydney or any other big city in Australia or elsewhere, a strategy not changing substantially over so many years, I think, is a sign of a very, very strong, sound and robust strategy. If it's easy to peek holes into it, then then maybe the strategy wasn't that good after all.
One of the interesting ones, and I agree, I'm a bit of bias, but I agree. A couple of things. One of the ones, when we recommended part of the strategy that Bankstown line be converted to Metro Rapid Transit, was a term back then, that was one that was hard to communicate, and people would come to me, particularly people who worked on the Sydney or Northwest Metro, who were really excited that Rapid Transit or Metro is back on the agenda, and say, this is fantastic, but I don't understand that. And even I started having some doubts myself, and then we just tested it, and the Metro team tested it again, and it just made sense. And then obviously there's a change of government from the Liberals to Labor in New South Wales a couple of years ago, and you could hear the noise. Look, is that Bankstown line conversion the thing worth doing? And I thought, I wonder if that's going to stop. And then I hear, I'm just going dark again. And then the commitment is made to the Bankstown conversion, and that was one that was hard to communicate simply because it's a very complex story. But there was a lot of thinking done. And probably the other thing I would say is, although the strategy was released in 2012 and we were only commissioned by the government to do it from 2011, a couple of names, I've dropped Les Wallinger's name, but Simon Lane as well.
Mm.
They were onto, and even Jim Glasson in Transport at the time, when they were on to the importance of this strategy for a while, and particularly when the Sydney Metro announcement wasn't getting traction, they knew that we needed a good long-term strategy. So I was actually probably working on that strategy from about 2007, and a lot of that work never saw the light of day, but it just continually evolved.
Yeah.
And then, so that's 5 years. So it doesn't. If that strategy had only been started up in 2011, it wouldn't have been as robust. And don't get me wrong, there were people who were sharply critical of the strategy, but I think that was actually good because, and some people who today will not agree with it, but you had a lot of challenge. So this strategy just wasn't coming out of the blue; it was subject to a lot of challenge, and I felt particularly excited to see that the government was still committed to the Bankstown line conversion. No doubt, the actual technical side of that has proven trickier than we'd hoped, but the story on the long-term outcomes. So.
I mean, what's important to recognize for the Bankstown line conversion, especially, is that there were different solutions discussed over the years to actually do it. So if you look at the Bankstown line, how it is converted today, you look at all these curved platforms and tight curves and stations and so on, and they said, is it really that suitable? And the answer is probably not. There are many other lines. If you compare the Bankstown line with Epping to Chatswood, you would say the stations on Epping to Chatswood were way more suitable for metro operations without any changes, right? But for the Bankstown line, at some stage there was discussion, there was an investigation of straightening the platforms, realigning the tracks, making it easier to convert into metro. But then there was an investigation, and then this is so expensive, and we just go on with the curved platforms. And then the mechanical gap fillers came in that I worked on with Steve Orley and so on. So, but if you just look at the outcome today and you say, well, this is tricky, well, yes, it's tricky, but for a reason. It's tricky in order to save a lot of money that the straightening of the line would have cost, and so it's always a compromise, but I think the outcome will still be good because the service at the end of the day on the Bankstown line will be much better under Sydney Metro than as it could ever be under Sydney Trains. And that's not because Sydney Metro is better than Sydney Trains. It's because of less operational complexity. You just have a metro service that goes from end to end and is much less complex than Sydney Trains, with trains pretty much going everywhere, right?
So what happens on the Bankstown line is you have from the Granvilles and the Strathfields, you have trains coming in via Central and Town Hall, and from the East Hills you have train in Campbelltown coming in via Central, then East via Museum St James, and the Bankstown's in the middle, so the trains sort of go this way or that way depending on the gaps. And that was something that was very clear that a lot of operational people were saying, this is a fantastic opportunity for the Sydney Metro to deal with that issue. Then you can run, these express trains from Campbelltown, more trains. So to my mind, having looked at that, I was convinced, but it was a harder message to sell in a broader community. But it stood the test of time.
I think in order to wrap this up, I'm conscious of your time. We already went over what we wanted to go on. I think you mentioned yourself that you were biased. You have deservedly a lot of pride in this work. And so have I, by the way. If you're ever involved in your career in something that is this formative from a strategic viewpoint and then ends up to being implemented over a number of years and not just thrown away and replaced
Yeah.
with something else at the first opportunity. I think this is really great, and it's a, I think it's a testimony for good work that was done at the time, and also for um, the following generations of people seeing it through,
Yeah.
recognizing the merit and running with it, right? So
What's the saying?
well done, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was going to say, there's a saying that execution eats strategy for breakfast. So one of the things I think there are two things. One is I have confidence it's a good strategy, but I also take my hat off to the people who actually made it happen.
Mm.
Like it could have, without great project people and great operational people, it would fall over. The other thing I would say is that I'm proud to be associated. One of the great things about these initiatives is you can see your fingerprints on solutions. There's many fingerprints. You'll see your fingerprints, Frank, and I can think of many people in my industry, and I can actually see their fingerprint when I see something and I walk around the network. I think there's some great. I think there were some great minds brought to the challenges of Sydney's Rail Future and the projects that spun off from them. And it's just great to see so many people working productively. We obviously there was a really difficult period in the lead up, but I think we all had our fights, and most people then just said we've got to do things differently. And this may not be, it certainly isn't the perfect strategy, but I'm really been impressed by the way people say this is the direction we want to head, and really rolled up their sleeves and move there. So
The important thing, I believe, is that it's continually improving. I think nobody
yeah,
can say that Sydney, with regards to rail transport, has gone backwards over the last 10,
no,
15 years. And that's the important thing, yeah. Can it be perfect within a couple of years? No, it can't. But I think um, all the initiatives that were done in the meantime, be it the Clearways program that was done many years ago, removing targeted some key bottlenecks of the existing network,
yeah,
uh, simplifying the timetable, getting rid more or less of this spaghetti network that was the nickname for the
yeah,
suburban train
yeah,
services in Sydney, the sectorization of the network. So there are many good things that I believe have led to a quite reliable service. Yeah, I mean Sydney is in the press once in a while for some failure that spreads out across the network. But then you look at the complexity and the size of a city like this, and you said, well, the fact that it doesn't happen more often is already an indication of quality, I
yeah.
believe. Right?
You got a high demand. You got challenges with the age of assets. You got challenges with climate resilience, and storms and wind and lightning and all those things. It's quite good challenges. I think another one of the arguments we actually had for a standalone system is that from a resilience point of view, you're better off having two networks, because it's amazing how if one network goes down, if the single network goes down, it just impacts everywhere. So no, but I do think there is a remarkable job in Sydney. I actually think one of my things is that when we look at how good this metro is, don't underestimate how good the suburban network is, given the age of the assets, the multiple tasks, and my challenge to people is they're doing a good job now, but even imagine, and that's part of this saying ATO on the existing network. We've got to imagine people do amazing things on that network now, but let's imagine what more they can do in 10 years' time, and that would be my challenge is to people. Yeah,
A last thing I want to mention, which I think went very well in Sydney, was the creation of a culture, of a joint transport culture in the rail space. It would have been very easy to create a competitive tension, almost like an animosity between the existing suburban service and everything around that, and the new metro, with one saying,
yeah,
we are newer, we are better, we are everything, and the other one saying, no, you're not, because you have it much easier than we have it. what I think has been communicated very well and has been adopted by industry very well is the collaboration, the hand-in-hand collaboration between the suburban network and the metro network. That the metro in itself creates some improvements, but only can improve things in combination with the existing suburban network and the improvements there, and vice versa. So that the suburban network cannot grow by itself or shouldn't grow by itself, but the growth of Sydney Metro complements the suburban network in a better way than suburban extensions could have done. And that was done really, really well in Sydney, that there's an understanding that both networks are necessary, both networks are important, and only by those two networks complementing each other, the total solution will be really, really successful and really good.
No, I totally agree. I take my hats off to the leaders and the teams in both, because it would have. And I had seen moments. I had seen moments probably over a decade ago, or probably in the late, the 2008-9, where there was that tension. But the cultures were strong about actually delivering a better outcome, and I think to see the way the two networks work together today is a testament to that.
Great. Gary, thank you very much for your time. I hope that was interesting to the listeners to hear how Sydney did their transport planning, or how this really formed into something that's reality today and will remain reality in the future. So thank you very much, and all the best for your future endeavors. Always hoping that you or me or both of us may be involved in something similar in the future, should it ever happen again. Thank you.
No, I certainly. Hopefully, I'd like to see you involved in that ATO over ETCS, Frank. Hopefully, you get a chance.
The people in Sydney know
Okay,
my
thank
number,
you.
so they can always contact me. All right. Thanks, Gary. Bye bye.
Bye.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.